Welcome back to the Daily Poem here on the Close Reads Podcast Network. I'm David Kern. Today's poem is one of the most famous poems ever written. It is Robert Frost's Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening. According to The Guardian, the UK newspaper, back in 2013, they reported that the BBC's Poetry Please program listed Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening as the most requested poem that they get. And right now, large swaths of our country are seeing the first, well, maybe not the first, but seeing snowfall in their yards. Won't happen here in North Carolina for a little bit, but it is cold. So I thought, this is at least one of those poems probably share on the podcast at least once a year. Despite its popularity, it's worth bringing up on the podcast. I mean, you'll probably read it in other places, hear it in other places. Nonetheless, I wanted to share it with you. Robert Frost, as you know, is one of the most important American poets, one of the most famous American poets, was the only poet to receive 4 Pulitzer Prizes. He received a Congressional Gold Medal, was the Poet Laureate of Vermont, lived from 1874 to 1963. This is how this poem goes. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So this is a poem that was written in 1922, published in 1923 in a collection called New Hampshire. He is supposed to have written a letter to a friend in which he called it my best bid for remembrance. And I suppose it is, certainly one of his claims to fame. It will be remembered for a very long time. The current Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, read it at the eulogy of his father, also a Prime Minister of Canada, saying the woods are lovely, dark and deep, and he has kept his promises and earned his sleep. And there's lots of, thought about, is this the poem of someone who's about to die, someone who is despondent? There is certainly a melancholy about the poem in some ways. Someone who's, maybe longing for something more, I suppose, is, that's a case that is often made about this poem. Another thing that he is supposed to have said about this poem is that he wrote it in a single nighttime sitting, that it just sort of occurred to him. He wrote it, he sat down to write, came to him, and he produced this poem. One of those poems that's going to be remembered forever. I imagine at the end of it, he thought, well, that's the best poem I'm ever going to write, or that's one of the best things I've ever written, or that's a poem that everyone will like, something like that. I don't know that it's his best poem. I don't think that it is. But it's so formally precise and perfect that it's easy to memorize, and it's so rereadable, and you can spend a lot of time with it, even though it seems simple on the surface. And everybody, it speaks to something that I think everybody kind of longs for, or appreciates. There's a sort of universal appeal to the aesthetic experience of standing in the woods, watching the snowfall in a truly beautiful place. It's sort of transformative. It takes us to some, almost like a fantasy realm or something like that, something like out of a fairy tale. But as in a fairy tale, the question of where you go next is the thing that is lingering in this poem, and one of the things that makes it remembered, I think. There is the formal elements, the rhymes, the iambic pentameter, the consistency of all that, the sort of pure craftsmanship of it. But at the end, there's the question of what happens next. And that's where the mystery comes in. That's what keeps us lingering with it for so long. And it's what makes, a wonderful winter poem, a late fall winter poem, when it's cold outside and it's dark earlier and there's snow on the ground, and you're kind of beginning to long for warm weather, for harvests and for flowers and the green on the trees and things like that. So then that makes the line "miles to go before I sleep." Is it a sad line? Is it a line of longing? Or is it a line, sort of an adventurous line, and a line that there is great things in store? There's so many different ways that can be read, that I think that's what makes this poem remembered. So once more, here is "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening" by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. This has been the Daily Poem. Thanks so much for listening. Be back tomorrow with another poem for you.